Hi, my name is Peter, and today I'm going to talk to you about some of the results I found when I did a survey of educational creators about fair labor practices and compensation and work conditions and all that jazz. So let's look at it. I'm just going to mention now before I forget, if you have any questions, you should go and put them in the comments below, or you can tweet at me. My tweet information is going to be at the end of this, or just do @the_Musser. But it would be better if you put them in the comments below so that other people can see what questions you're asking, and then you can also see if other people have been asking the same question. Okay? Okay, so let's do this. So who am I? My name is Peter, and I have a master's degree in library and information studies. What that means is that I spent about 2.5 years of my life looking at online educational video as a tool for the masses. And I think a lot about that and how we can design digital platforms to be a little bit better for educational purposes, as well as things like information ethics. And when I say information ethics, what I mean is the way that information and the way that we present it impacts and enfranchises or disenfranchises the people who consume it. This is a big question. This whole realm is what basically is concerned with things like fake news. So there you go. But aside from having a master's degree, I also am myself an educational creator. I make videos about library and information science. So basically, mostly I do videos around information literacy, and I also make library propaganda. And that is because I am myself a librarian. And what it means to me to be a librarian is that I am concerned with helping the masses find the information they need in whatever form that takes. That can be books, that can be journal articles, that can be YouTube videos, that can be good news, like that is to say accurate news, or whatever it takes to make sure that the person who is consuming the information is able to do so in a responsible and useful way. So what did I do? I conducted an anonymous survey of educational content creators to build a picture of 3 factors. The first thing is demographics, the next one is compensation, and the last one is working conditions and quality of life. Now you'll notice that there's an asterisk next to content creators, and I just want to clarify what I mean when I say content creators. When I say that, I mean everyone that's involved in the process of creating and putting out really good educational content. That can mean, the folks who are in front of the camera, of course, the hosts, but also the folks who are behind the scenes. That could be scriptwriters, editors, animators, what else do I have? Social media managers, all of these folks, because they all contribute to the creation of educational content. And just because we don't necessarily see them doesn't mean that they don't count. And so I wanted to make sure that in this survey, they counted. That's important to me. So yeah. And why am I doing this is basically because as far as I can tell, no one else has done it, or at least not publicly. I'm sure that companies like YouTube have done this kind of research before, but generally it seems to me like that kind of research ends up being proprietary, and we might not ever see the results from it because it doesn't necessarily put the company in a good light. And I think that for us, for our sake as creators, we need to have access to this information so that we can make better decisions about what we're doing in our personal and professional lives to take care of ourselves and each other. I strongly believe that creators deserve fair wages and have good labor practices and are able to execute good labor practices so that the work that they're doing that is so important doesn't in the long run hurt them more than it helps them. I don't think that we should be martyrs for the cause of a better world. I think that by making the world a better place, we benefit from that because I think we should. And also I think that having this information out there is an important first step to making all of this happen. And that's why I'm putting this out there to you, the creators, to do with what you will. So let's talk about the results of what I found. First, let's look at demographics. So I wanted to break out demographics first because this is important to understand kind of the perspectives that we're getting or not. First, we can look at gender identity here. As you can see, we had a pretty good split in terms of men and women, with a little bit of underrepresentation by non-binary folks, around 41% women and 58% men. I don't know that that's necessarily representative of the community. I know in the field of education more generally, women actually outnumber men. It's more likely that you will have a woman teacher than you will have a teacher who is a man. So that's an interesting thing. Another interesting thing here is when I asked people about their sexualities, 76% of folks identified as straight, but 23% identified as not straight. And so that can be bisexual, gay, lesbian, that big umbrella. I think that some folks would probably look at this and say, oh, that's an overrepresentation of not straight people. But 2 points to that. First of all, is it? Is it really? And the second point is that if it is, it's only because I myself am queer. And so since I know lots of queer folks and queer folks know me, they might feel more comfortable responding to this survey than they might normally feel because they know that it's me who's doing it. And they might feel like their identities and their personhood is going to be more respected by someone who has that kind of affinity with them. The final one that's worth mentioning is when we look here, 95.3% of respondents identified as white, with only 4.7% identifying as not white. This is a problem. I don't think that this is actually the makeup of educational creators online, especially if we look at the world as a whole. And we're going to look at the next slide where folks are coming from. In the US, I think it is a lot more common to see white creators than creators of color, but not to this degree. And I think one of the reasons that there is such a small number of folks who self-identified as white is because perhaps I just wasn't able to reach folks who create content very well who also aren't white. That's something to just keep in mind. In terms of the demographics for age, unsurprisingly, the majority of folks that took this survey fall in this 22 to 33 age group. And I think that this is like what one would expect to see because folks between 22 and 33 who also are creating educational content likely have pretty good educations themselves. They have access to good educations and the money and resources that it takes to get that. And by proxy, have some of the technological skills and access that they would need to make this content. I also think that the folks that fall in this age group, and I'm certainly no exception, might have a little bit more hope, might be somewhat less jaded around their field, and they might want to do a little bit more work to tell others about their field. We have that unbridled enthusiasm, us young people, and so I think that kind of makes us more likely to put ourselves out there. Not to discount everyone that falls in the older group, but I think that's why we have that big bump here. For country of residence, mostly respondents from the US, overwhelmingly, with a long tail. And then in terms of audience size, I just want to clarify something. So audience size across platforms means the combination of subscribers on YouTube and Twitter and Tumblr and wherever you have access to folks online. That's what the audience size is, the combination of all of those. I feel really good about this spread. I think that this helps at least make things a little bit representative, and I think it will make some of the later things when we start talking about wages a little bit more useful. But yeah, I feel like this is pretty good. This 501 to 1,000 range, though, kind of underrepresented. We've got one respondent from there, so maybe in the next go, we'll see how that goes. Now, when we're talking about compensation, there's a two-part question that I wanted to answer. The first part is how much money do creators make from creating, and is it enough, and what exactly is enough? The hard thing about answering this question is that, first of all, people have lots of different sources of income when it comes to creating content online. And they get that income in many different currencies, and depending on where you're at, you can have a wide-ranging cost of living. Someone who's making content perhaps in California, for example, is going to have a much higher cost of living than perhaps somebody in Mississippi. And that ends up really skewing what would otherwise be a useful number if we just looked at the dollar amount or the pound amount, as it were. And so the way that I figured that we might at least address this a little bit is I decided to express the results in ratios of basically how much money you make to how much money you spend on housing costs. There's a lot of talk out there about how like the golden ratio or like the rule of thumb that you should rely on is you should never spend, or your income should always be at least 3 times as much money as your rent or your housing expenses. And so the way that I did that is the percentages that you're going to see on the next screen are how close someone has come to having a YouTube or social media derived income that is at least 3 times their housing income. So for example, if you make $3,000 from your YouTube channel a month and your income and your housing cost is $1,000, that would be 100%. Okay, so here's the first big look at numbers. Let me just hide me real quick. Oh man, having two mice on the screen. Okay, so we have here three tables. This represents the compensation of everyone completely. This one represents folks who are strictly independent creators, so folks who make content for themselves on their own, or maybe as part of a small team. And then this one is for folks who make content as part of a larger team, or folks who would otherwise perhaps be identified as employees. Now, I put the plus there because someone being an employee doesn't mean necessarily that they don't also create content on their own, but largely folks are employees. The first thing you'll see probably is that if you want to make a good living wage according to that 3-to-1 ratio, you got to have at least 100,000 subscribers to 500,000 subscribers. You have to fall in that range somewhere. But once you get there, you're pretty good. However, you'll notice that if you are an indie person, you make a little bit less. And if you are an employee, you make a little bit more, which I think is fascinating. I think the reason that this is the case, that folks who are employees make a little bit more, is because folks who are employees are protected by labor laws and fair wage practices and standards. If you are an independent creator, you don't have those to rely on, and so your income is going to be a little bit lower, I think. And then we see this big bump of where folks from 500,000 to 1 million subscribers bring in quite a bit more money. This is a little complicated for reasons that I won't get into, so just notice that number. That's a very small number for a representative size. I should look into it more. But then here we see from the 1 million to 10 million range, we actually see a decrease. And I have been thinking a lot about why that is. And I think probably what it is that as you get into the 1 million range, or even the 500,000 subscriber range, you start adjusting your housing situation to accommodate your work situation when it comes to YouTube. So you might actually seek to find a place to live where you can have a dedicated studio space. And that might cost you more, which is why it becomes a larger percentage of your income to spend on housing. And that's why the ratio drops to less. That's conjecture. I think it warrants more follow-up, but we'll see. The next slide then goes from how much people are making to how much people are working. So again, if you work about full-time, it's because you are at 100,000 to 500,000 subscribers. I guess it's kind of tricky to put the cart before the horse, but it just so happens that once you have 100 to 500,000 subscribers, you tend to work around full time. Now, if you're on your own, this is a little bit less. You might only work 36 hours, which in Canada is still full time. But if you work for someone else, the numbers are quite a bit higher. Someone who works for a company with 100 to 500,000 subscribers is likely to work 11 hours of overtime if they're in the US. And that number stays significantly higher for all of these. This number right here is an exception. This person who works 70 hours a week, they're a very specific person, and I can't explain why this number is a little bit skewed, only that they provided reasons that make a lot of sense and that can't be corrected for, but also don't warrant being dropped from the numbers. So just recognizing this is an anomaly number. It's fine. Anything else on here? Yeah, I think it's just important to note that employees tend to work a lot of overtime, which I think is really fascinating and a little troubling because these are also the folks that we mentioned in the last slide probably are protected more by wage laws and labor laws. But perhaps it's working that overtime that actually allows them to make more than a living wage. Comfortably more than a living wage, but I guess we'll see. Some other interesting findings that I noticed when I was doing the survey is that of all the respondents, 55 of them, or about 86%, reported that they do get income from doing things on YouTube. They reported non-zero income. Of 42 respondents, that is, say, the number of respondents that provided both income and housing costs, 20 of them, or 47.6%, could live on their YouTube income. Of these 20, 15 get less than a quarter of their income from ad revenue. Instead, they get it from things like Patreon or brand deals, and actual wages end up being their main sources. 12 of them work more than 40 hours a week. And so that's 60%, 75%. And then the average wage earner works 48.9 hours a week. So if you work for someone else doing this work, you're doing an average of 9 hours of overtime. And that's a little troublesome, because that then starts impacting what you're able to do in your off time and how you're able to recuperate and recover from the work that you're doing. For this here, these 54 respondents, that's the number of respondents who provided income, housing, and income sources. Of these folks, 10 of them said that ad revenue is their largest income source, but only 3 of them make enough from it that they could live off of it. And what that live off of it means is basically the income to housing ratio is 80% or more. Because let's be honest, a lot of us survive off of less than 3 times the amount of our housing expenses. And I think that that's worth being upfront about. Some other interesting findings that I think are worth mentioning is that there are many sources of YouTube adjacent income. Folks reported getting money from their family, Kickstarter, using Amazon affiliate links, doing contract work, getting speaking gigs and events, doing consulting work, and applying and receiving grants and awards, and licensing videos. And I think the big takeaway from all of this is that educational YouTubers have complex and inconsistent financial situations. For example, one respondent told me that they had a lot of trouble answering the question of how much money they make per month, because, they might do some videos in January, for example, but then they'll go for 3 months without doing anything or getting any money from it. And so to address that, the way I did it is I did average over, I think, 6-month periods, like how much money on average. And it isn't perfect, but it was my way of addressing that. But that's wild. And I think it's worth taking note of. Also, most creators take a financial hit so that they can do what they do until they get to the point where it becomes sustainable. I guess one way to think of that is that it is basically hobby work that you're doing until you are at that 100 to 500,000 subscriber range. But I think people still treat it as full-time work because they want to succeed and because they have seen others succeed at it. Even though we know that success is not guaranteed and progress is not linear. So, looking at working conditions and quality of life, I asked the question, do you feel that you're fairly compensated for the work that you do in the sector? 40% of folks said no, and only a little bit over a third of folks said yes, with a quarter of folks saying maybe they are, maybe they aren't. To the question, do you ever feel pressured by others to work for less than your time or skills are worth? Over half of folks said yes, while only 44% said no. And of the folks, when asked, do you ever feel pressured by yourself to work for less than your time or skills are worth? A large majority of folks report that yes, they do feel like they are putting more pressure on themselves to perform outside of what they should be compensated for. And I thought that this was an important question because later on in the survey, we asked questions around mental health. And I think that how you perceive the work that you do and your compensation for it really ties closely to how you see yourself and how you treat yourself and how you take care of yourself. This idea of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation or recognition is an important thing to keep in mind. I just want people to know that you're not alone if you feel like you're pressuring yourself to work more than your time and skills are worth. It doesn't mean it's healthy, but you're not the only person who's doing it. And I think that that's, if you're thinking about it, then you can actually start thinking about how to adjust to that and how to treat yourself better. When I asked, so I wanted also to look at mental health more directly and physical health. And so I asked 2 questions. One was, how has doing this work impacted your mental health? And unsurprisingly, folks feel that it has both helped and hurt their mental health in major ways, or not in major ways, but a large number of folks feel that it has either helped or hurt or both their mental health, but less so for physical health. Folks feel that there's been less of an impact on their physical health from doing this work than their mental health. The number breakout is here. So mental health wise, 84% of folks feel that it helped, but 71% feel that it hurts their mental health. With just a very small number of folks feeling unsure or feeling like it doesn't impact their mental health. compared to this, where you get 37, so about 50% of folks feel that it doesn't impact their physical health. While we're looking at these statistics, I just want to call to attention that creators for channels 100,000 and larger actually see more hurt or report more hurt than help in terms of what they do and how it impacts their mental health. Again, folks with channels of 100,000 subscribers or more feel that doing this work hurts their mental health more than it feels that it helps their mental health. And that's problematic. And when we're looking at the physical health aspect, I just want to mention that in a traditional workplace, labor laws typically would dictate that occupational health and safety notices about the risks of your work should be made available. That's what labor laws are all about, is protecting the worker. As independent creators, as independent laborers, basically, we don't have that same protection. We don't have an organization that will provide this information that says, hey, by the way, what you're doing has a risk of hurting you in this way, and here's how to prevent that. We just kind of do it because we feel like we have to. And if you go back to this slide, like field pressure to work for less than your time or skills are worth, you might not even think of it. You might just think that that's par for the course and that's something you should do. When, like, let me just say right now that you deserve to work in the healthiest, most responsible way for you. I think also part of that has to do with the perception of this perception has to do with the fact that a lot of the folks who make the content on YouTube, who make content on YouTube fall in that younger demographic who might not have necessarily been in the professional labor world more often. I can tell you, because I worked as an occupational health and safety representative in a very large employer, that the work that goes into creating YouTube content and doing online content and desk jobs does have negative impacts on your health. People might not perceive it because they just have never been trained or told that that was the case. But we'll see later on that some folks have noticed that they are hurting from this. So I wanted now to feature some of what folks have said in their own words. I'll just read a couple of these. So on the good side, folks say that, like, it's given me a focus that I was really lacking. I felt like I was in a dead end career-wise. And as my channel grows, so does the hope it will generate enough income that I can leave my job or leverage this experience to get a job in an industry I enjoy. This person says that they were able to hire a personal trainer, and I'm way more fit now than I was 6 months ago. And then I think the sentiment that we all kind of relate to is, I love doing work that is important and meaningful to me, and this makes me happy. So there is good news out there, and we all know this, but it deserves to be called out and read aloud. For others, it's a bit more of a mixed bag. For example, this person and the last comment says that my work in creating educational content has given me a wonderful community and gained me amazing skills which have both bolstered my mental health. However, the pressure to create content for no income worsens my anxiety and depression. I work multiple day jobs to keep up with expenses, so it is difficult to find time to create content. So when I go a while without creating content, I feel anxious and guilty. So while I enjoy creating, it also generates stress. And then for folks that just have had a rough time, here's some of the comments that were shared that just that show kind of how things can go wrong. I'll do this last one. It's really hard to separate work and leisure. Even when I'm not at work and I have free time, I am inclined to either promote my work online or do extra work from home to get ahead. This makes a work-life balance extremely difficult because on the one hand, I'm doing this voluntarily, but on the other hand, it's hard to find time to relax, be bored, or cultivate other interests outside of work, which in turn makes creativity stagnate. I'm also overbooked and overscheduled in general, and there's virtually no time to exercise or maintain my health. So that's some of the things that folks have been facing. I want to talk a little bit about what the survey isn't and where I could have done better, or maybe I couldn't have done better. I think that the survey has a pretty good sample size. So we had about 64 respondents total, but we also had very small subsets because of that. So for example, Recreate EDU has about a membership of around 30. And so 60% of that is about 20%. So 20%-ish of We Create EDU responded, which is pretty good. But when we start breaking that down into smaller groups, so for example, the income groups, for example, we only had like 4 or 5 respondents for each of those groups. Another kind of limitation of this is that it relies on self-reporting. And self-reporting as a way to get information is, well, it has its limitations. So for example, again, so many examples, a person might not necessarily know off the top of their head how much income they make going into the survey. And so they might ballpark what they've got. Or perhaps their income varies wildly from month to month. And of course, when it comes to things like mental health and physical health, as you recall, talking about physical health, a lot of creators feel like doing this hasn't really impacted their physical health, but that doesn't necessarily bear out with reality. It's just that if you don't have that awareness that it's happening, because maybe it's happening at such a slow pace, you don't think of it. Some respondents explained that income numbers are notoriously unstable. We talked about that. And perhaps the biggest limitation of the survey is that the survey and the analysis was done by a team of 1 with a budget of 0. That's me. I am the one with a budget of 0. What ended up happening from this, so if you took the survey, you probably got the link for it or the ask to take it back in November, December. Something big happened in my life in January, and so I had to basically take the survey and just put it on a back burner for a few months as I got my life back together. And because of that, I wasn't able to really commit as much time to it consistently as I was hoping. And so that's why these results are coming out in July rather than April, which is what I was aiming for originally. And that is, like, I don't think it affects the quality of the survey's results, but because it's just me, I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind. But with all of that said, I do feel really good about the results of the survey. I think it's a good first step in understanding and addressing the bigger issues around educational video and labor. And if we want to fix these, we have to understand them first. So, where do we go from here? Well, I have some ideas, but I will need your help. Here are some of the things that I would like to do just with all of this stuff in mind. I do want to publish these results in an easier to consume form. So like maybe Medium blog posts or infographics, things like that, so that more people are in the know. I'm super happy to have done this as a video first because I think it's what we all know and it's what I feel comfortable with. But like this video right now is at like 29 minutes and that's not going to do it for most people if we want them to see the entire thing. Another thing I'd like to do is to do the survey annually. Now that we have done this once, we have a baseline. And if we do it again, we can start seeing trends year over year. We can see if things are improving, whether that's better mental health outcomes or better compensation or worse, which is what we don't want to see, but we won't know either way if we don't ask. So basically iterating. And then because I'm a librarian, I want to identify, gather, and create even some resources that address some of the issues identified. And I want to make them available to all of you in a way that works for you. So these could be resources on running a business, making things like videos and other things, what makes you a creator. Better labor practices, improving mental health, occupational health and safety resources, resources for professional development, which if we were employees, we would have access to, and funding alternatives, because not all of us, we know at this point, the traditional funding doesn't work necessarily, but also resources on research because we make educational content. We want to make sure that we're doing good stuff, as well as resources on leisure. How to protect your mental health. You know, if we're going to do that, we need to also start recognizing that we need to take breaks and we need to figure out, you know, what a good productive break looks like. And I would love to gather these and put them together and make them available for all of y'all. And then in the long term, I think it's time for us to look into what would be needed to start organizing labor in a meaningful and effective way. We saw this a little bit with Internet Creators Guild, God rest its soul, but I think we might have a little bit more success if we really focus on specifically educational creators. I think that there's a lot that we can do if we focus our work, focus this work on better labor practices just on us, rather than trying to be everything for everyone. I don't think that's going to work out. I think that that's why Like in a city, for example, you can have a dozen different unions that represent a dozen different industries, and they all succeed because they know the needs of that specific group, and each specific group has different needs. So I want to do all of this, but to do so, and why me? Well, for one, I already know most of the folks that orbit in the YouTube education realm. I know the creators, I know the researchers, I know educators, I know networks, and I know YouTube employees. And perhaps more importantly, they know me. I am a known quantity. I've been researching YouTube EDU for 6 years now, 2.5 doing my master's, and then 3.5 before I did my master's as well. And I'm no stranger to the process or methods of doing research. This is just one way of doing it. There are other ways of doing research. And I'm qualified. I have a relevant master's degree. I have free healthcare because I live in Canada. Free healthcare. And I have a part-time job that gives me a really flexible schedule. And so I think that all of these things make me a really good person to keep doing this work for all of y'all. And also, I'm a librarian. This is my praxis, y'all. So to do this, what do I need from you? Money. Just going to say it. I need money to do this. I've been doing this work for free for 6 years because I have been doing school. And when I do school, I had been getting money through my GI Bill, which for those of you who don't know is basically tuition assistance and a living stipend for folks who were in the military. And I could justify using that money to do this because it was part of my education. It was making me a better librarian and making me a better information professional. And now that I've graduated, I don't get that money anymore. So at this point, it's kind of all pro bono. And while I am still happy to do the work, I have to recognize my own limitations. I got to pay rent. And I think there's a little bit too much irony in me doing free labor like this to promote better wages and working conditions. I believe that I deserve to be fairly compensated as much as I believe that you all also deserve to be fairly compensated. And so I need to walk that walk more than just talk that talk. How that plays out, I will leave it to you. I do have a Patreon, my Stacks and Facts Patreon. And so you can donate to me there every now and then if you want, monthly, at whatever amount you want. If you would like to help me in a bigger way, shoot me a message. I do have PayPal. I can accept Canadian dollars and US dollars, being an American in Canada. But the more money I get, the bigger I can make this a part of my life. I have some plans around that, and I'm doing some more planning around that to see what that looks like. But I don't want to get too much into the details right here because this video isn't about that. It's about making sure that you all are informed about how things are. So that's where I'm at. If you have any questions, again, put them in the comments below and I will answer all of them. We can actually use the comment section for a productive, engaging conversation with each other about what we are all experiencing and what works and what doesn't. And also, let me know what in this worked and what doesn't, because if I'm going to do this again, I want to make sure that the second iteration is good. So that's it. That's all I've got. Until next time, thank you so much for doing everything that you do in this space, for making educational content or facilitating educational content, and for supporting the community that you're a part of, that we're all a part of. We would be nowhere if we didn't have each other. So I'm glad to be doing this with you. Until next time, again, thanks for watching, and don't forget to ask questions. All right, bye.